Great, I'll get started then. Thanks everyone so much for joining us today to discuss what's potentially one of the most topical issues in energy policy right now. For those who don't know me, I'm Juliet Phillips. I'm a senior policy advisor at E3G, which is an independent climate change think tank. I coordinate our UK place-based transition programme, which covers all things green homes. We've organised today's sessions following the launch of a new report, which we published last week, setting out a suite of measures and recommendations to the government, which look to address the inefficiency penalty. And I'll put a link to the new report in the chat for those who haven't seen it already. I'm really pleased to be joined by a lineup of experts to delve into some of the proposals in the report in more detail. So a really warm welcome today to Peter Smith from National Energy Action, who's going to start us off by discussing fuel poverty support measures. We'll then move on to Keith Watson from EDF on delivering energy saving measures to mid to low income households. You might have heard the Eco Plus proposal, so we're going to learn more about that today. We'll then move on to Nigel Donoghue from the Installation Assurance Authority, who's going to be setting out an Olympic-style skills and training programme to really supercharge energy efficiency supply chains. We'll move on then to Stu Horn and Abby Ward from the Energy Saving Trust, who are going to overview recommendations regarding how we can boost public engagement and advice services to support people towards greener homes. And then finally, we've got David Adams from the Energy Efficiency Infrastructure Group, who's going to be overviewing the energy saving stamp duty proposal. And just in terms of housekeeping, each speaker will briefly present on their proposal, and there'll be a chance for Q&A with all attendees at the end of the session. So yeah, please think about some questions during the presentations, and there'll be a chance to go into them in more detail then. But before we get started, I'll just kick off with a bit of background on the situation which we find ourselves in, and what exactly we mean when we say a efficiency penalty. So hopefully you can all see my slide. Obviously, we're in the midst of a cost of living crisis, and looking at some of the key structural drivers, these include in the UK, the cold and leaky nature of our homes. We have some of the least efficient homes in Western Europe. And added to that, nearly all homes are connected to the fossil gas grid, which leaves families sharply exposed to volatile fossil gas markets. And as we can see by this chart, the amount of energy bill you're paying really relates very strongly to the energy performance certificate, or EPC, of the building. So this is now slightly out of date. This is from a report we did last year, but you can see people living in the most efficient homes are paying significantly less than those living in the most efficient homes. And we've crunched the numbers in the new report and found that those living in homes rated EPC C or less will be paying around £916 per year on average when the energy price cap rises to £2,800, as Ofgem has predicted. And addressing this efficiency penalty brings huge economic benefits. And we found that if at the current price cap today, everyone living in a home which was rated EPC C or lower, they would be saving over £10 billion each year. And that's a permanent bill saving. At the moment, though, whilst there has been some really welcome steps by the UK government, including cutting VAT on heat pumps and other measures, on the whole, the scale of the solution has more been focused on sticking plaster solutions, which are absolutely necessary to help people through and pay for their energy bills right now. But we also need to be looking at some of those structural long-term solutions, which we think is going to actually save the government a lot of money in the future, because fossil fuel prices are expected to remain volatile at least until 2030. So I'll just move on to quickly outline the home energy security strategy, which is what we've titled the new report, and sets out this ecosystem of measures. We realise decarbonising our homes is quite a thorny challenge. The UK has a very diverse housing stock, and of course, every household differs. So we do really need this joint up approach, bringing together all the different pieces of the puzzle. And some of these areas on the picture we'll be delving into in more detail today. But just to also add that across all this, we've put down long-term regulatory signals. We think it's really important to have that long-term framework. So things like minimum energy efficiency standards for all housing tenures, and also clarity on when fossil heating is going to be phased out. in order to boost demand and give that guarantee and confidence that both households and industries need. So that's enough from me. And without further ado, I'll hand over to our first speaker, Pete, if you want to kick off and overview proposals on fuel poverty.
Thanks very much, Juliet. And thanks very much for having us speak at this really well-timed webinar. I think it's true to say that as a fuel poverty charity, NEA has largely focused on the immediate financial response to the crisis in the last 6 months or so. As Juliet said, those sort of financial assistance is absolutely vital to get households through the worst of the energy crisis. But as a charity that's had an over 40-year mission to try and reduce needless energy demand and improve the quality of housing, it's devastating to see particularly an overlap between the lowest, those households that continue to live on the lowest incomes, also spending far more than they need to on fuel because of their energy inefficiency. We're right to sort of focus attention on that issue, because all too often these average energy price increases are talked about in terms of the average consumer, and those don't take any account of the needless amount that people pay due to the inefficiency of their homes. Even just based on that overall average amount that consumers are spending, we're in unprecedented times. If the energy price cap goes up to £2,800 in October, which, as Juliet mentioned, something that Jonathan Brearley said at a recent Base Select Committee, overall energy prices will have risen by about 150 to 170% in the space of 18 months, which is devastating to those households, all households, particularly those on low incomes, but particularly those that live in the least efficient homes. And sadly, we know that that vicious overlap is shared by too many households. I think just to focus on what we think can be done about it and where we are, we really welcomed the changes to the energy company obligation, which have been proposed by the UK government, and its expansion up to £1 billion. But we welcomed working with E3G to try and make sure that we get on with that revised eco scheme as soon as possible. And the delay that's very evident at the moment is resulting in a big collapse in terms of the energy efficiency installation rate, which is obviously hugely worrying in the current context, where the only real permanent solution to help people reduce their bills sustainably isn't being pulled as hard as it can. So we welcome the fact that E3G and a range of other organisations are supporting efforts to try and get that passage of those regulations through as soon as possible. We also support the mooted and potential government policy of an extended eco. As long as that extension isn't funded by energy consumers, we would welcome it supporting other types of households, not necessarily those that are in fuel poverty, but those that are on the edges of fuel poverty. Yeah, we're hoping to see whether or not that is an additional policy and something that we can really welcome, or whether or not it's really just rob Peters to pay Paul, and that programme is based on pulling underspends from various other programmes. But hopefully we will see moves in a positive direction on that. We also welcomed the government's original 2017 commitment to extend minimum energy efficiency standards. That initial pledge in the 2017 Clean Growth Strategy is almost now 5 years old, yet we're still waiting for that expansion of those minimum energy efficiency standards. The government consulted on the detail of their proposals over a year ago now, in March 2021, and we're still waiting for the government's response. We have got a lot of concerns that we might have moved backwards on that front, and that the proposals that they're now considering might not reflect very well on the or be similar to the original consultation proposals that they went out on. And the further delay to that programme is a significant concern, because, as Juliet rightly highlights, we need regulatory measures, long-term regulatory measures that support any financial incentives to give certainty within the energy market, and to be frank, just to allow landlords to see what type of improvements they're going to need to make to their own stock to drag it from the worst performing bands much higher up the EPC scale to the benefit of their tenants, but also them given the improvement in terms of the value of the asset. As well as details about the delays, we will also continue to be concerned about the lack of enforcement, either of the current standards or the prospects for enforcing adequately the enhanced regulatory requirements. That will be much more complicated if the government choose to move away from EPCs as a key measurement and look to reflect a new or slightly less well-known metrics, the principal way that we're going to judge compliance with that policy. There is one ray of light that the government have committed to an EPC, a landlords database, which we think is absolutely crucial in terms of tracking landlords' enforcement of those regulations, and we hope that that's going to be a useful tool for local authorities to do far more on enforcement than they've been able to date, or that they have done to date. And then finally, I just want to comment on the manifesto commitment. So these sit at the heart of not only delivering net zero, but our ambitious fuel poverty commitments, which are a statutory requirement on the UK government. The 9 billion commitment is sadly being sat upon and fed out in drips at the moment. And again, that does not provide clarity and certainty for the supply chain or for those households that really benefit from the full rollout of all of those programmes. Our efforts have been largely focused on the home upgrade grant, which is there to support the worst first, and particularly those households that are off the gas network that often have far higher energy costs. We know that there's over 180,000 fuel poor households in England alone who still languish in the least efficient bands, F and G. And so it's absolutely vital that the full remaining money for the home upgrade grant is delivered this Parliament as clearly stated government policy. Any moves away to that will devastate efforts to try and meet our fuel poverty commitments and will further enhance the energy inefficiency penalty, which the report rightly highlights. Finally, we don't believe in the course of the energy security strategy that the government produced, all efforts are being made to identify wider opportunities around energy efficiency, and we would like to see the government exploit further opportunities to get other actors like energy networks and those in the health sector and other organisations fully involved in trying to reduce permanent energy demand, which, as Juliet rightly highlights, has to be the long-term solution to tackling fuel poverty and delivering on net zero. And the benefits couldn't be clearer of doing that at present. So I'll stop there. I hope that's given you a useful overview and given you a few food for thought, and I look forward to some questions later on.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Pete. Yeah, really great overview of the situation, and I'm sure sparked lots of food for thought regarding questions later down the line. Keith, are you happy to come in next on Eco Plus?
Yeah, thank you, Julia, and thanks for inviting me along today. Let me just share my screen. Hopefully you guys can all see that.
Yeah, we can.
Perfect. So people who don't know me, I'm Keith Watson. I'm a senior policy and regulation analyst at EDF, and I'm going to be talking about the Eco Plus concept. So to build on the government support that's already been announced for this winter, the energy bill support scheme and such, we believe that improving the energy efficiency of a property is the most effective way of delivering bill savings that are sustained over time, that deliver year on year. Juliet mentioned in the kind of the intro, UK housing stock is one of the oldest and kind of leakiest in Europe when compared to our European neighbours. And this is driven by what I call an insulation gap, whereby 30% of the cavity walls, over 90% of the solid walls, and 34% of lofts in properties in Great Britain are not insulated. In fact, only 58% of Britain's homes meet the insulation standards of the 1970s, and less than 10% have an insulation age of 2002 or younger. Rising energy costs, which I'm sure we are all aware of, and is obviously the kind of the backdrop to the E3G's new report, is improving the case for insulation as a way of reducing bills, in that as prices rise, bill savings from energy efficiency measures increase and payback periods come down, making them a more cost-effective solution. In addition to the bill savings that they offer, obviously it's a great way to reduce your carbon emissions from your home, reduce reliance on gas, and also helping, thinking further ahead, to prepare our homes for future low carbon technologies such as heat pumps. Within the kind of for fuel poor households, we have the energy company obligation. The latest iteration of that came into effect from April. This is a long-running scheme that has kind of remained stalwart between different governments. However, there is no support for the 92% of the owner-occupied households in England that are classified as able to pay. So how do you address that gap? So our proposal is Eco Plus, which is, as a concept, is a proposed supplier-led scheme that would provide partially subsidised energy efficiency measures to households that are not eligible for Eco 4. I appreciate that's quite a broad group of people, but obviously you could target that, for example, to specific council tax bands, to target those households that are kind of borderline fuel poor, as was mentioned at the start. This would need to be an ambitious and long-term scheme in order to provide the confidence and the certainty that's needed to kind of drive investment in energy efficiency and to build a market for it in the longer term. It's not appropriate to fund this through additional policy costs on energy bills at this time, given the energy crisis that is ongoing. And therefore, we would call for this to be funded through general taxation. Subsidy levels, as I mentioned at the start of this slide, it's a partial subsidy scheme. This is not paying the full cost. These should be dynamic, and the level of contribution that a customer should make towards the cost should mirror that. It should allow these to float and adapt as needed. And the customer offer and how it's sold to customers should be flexible, and that would encourage competition and innovation amongst the scheme participants. Eco Plus could be up and running very quickly. The existing eco supply chain could be leveraged, and the industry processes that are already in place for Eco 4 could be reused and even simplified to make it an easier scheme to run for suppliers and for the scheme administrator. Important to note that what we're proposing here, yes, it does build on the success of Eco, but it is a fundamentally different scheme that would run separate to Eco 4, so as to not kind of disrupt the vital support that Eco 4 does provide to fuel poor households. So what sort of impact could Eco Plus make? So this depends on quite a lot of different variables, as I'm sure you can imagine, such as how big the scheme is in terms of the budget, what the subsidy levels will be, how much the customers are expected to contribute towards the cost. But for illustrative purposes, you can see the two boxes below there. Those are based on an annual scheme budget of £1 billion, so essentially matching Eco 4 funding, as was mentioned earlier. An average contribution towards the cost of measures at 50%, so customers paying half and half are subsidised, just to keep it simple. And also the current price cap prices, which came into effect from April. So the box on the left there kind of illustrates a scheme that would kind of the measure mix focused on the typically low cost measures or the lower cost measures, and the kind of impact that it could have for households throughout the UK. Quite significant bill savings, relatively low payback period on their investment, a large number of homes when focused on the lower cost measures, obviously, and obviously mitigated gas demand and carbon savings. If you kind of take that up and perhaps roll some of the more expensive measures into the kind of the pot, if you like, or the mix, namely solid wall insulation, which is often significantly more expensive than cavity wall and loft insulation. those build savings would go up, but obviously the number of homes would come down due to the increased measured cost. Payback periods would be, I mean, I know that looks high in comparison to the box on the left, but for solid wall insulation, that's not bad. So yeah, so depending on the measure mix, hopefully you get the picture of how kind of impactful the scheme could be. Now, if you then kind of overlay the forecasted increase to the price cap from October, you will see the difference that those kind of same criteria make in terms of bill savings. A significant increase in bill savings when focused on low cost measures, obviously reducing the payback period as well. Similarly on the right, again, big increase in bill savings for each household and quite a significant drop in payback periods, especially when considering high cost measures. Hopefully that kind of illustrates what I meant by the kind of the improving case for insulation. Hopefully that was helpful. I appreciate it's quite a big and detailed topic, so I'd be happy to answer any questions in the Q&A, and for anyone who would like to get in touch with me directly, my email address is shown on the screen below. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Keith. Thanks for walking us through a really exciting new proposal. I'm going to hand over to Nigel next to talk us about the skills and training programme.
Thanks, Juliet. Check. You can see my screen. How's that?
Not yet.
Try again.
Still don't. Oh, here we go. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, all good.
Yeah, you got the full shot.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, and thanks for the opportunity to talk today. Nigel Donner, Insulation Assurance Authority. Just want to cover a little bit of ground around skills and the general skills gap. So, starting at the top corner with retrofitted scale, I just resonate on Keith's presentation and the potential of 702,000 homes on Eco Plus. My own calculation that we need to ramp up to around 2 million measures per annum for insulation alone. Kind of resonates when you're looking at the whole house retrofit. And going back on Peter's point about the need for clarity and certainty, skills are always a bit chicken and egg. The situation we find ourselves in the moment is it can be used as a stick to beat us, i.e. the industry is not going to be capable of ramping up to deliver what we want. And then the counter side of it is if the industry hasn't got any certainty around sustainability, it's going to be reluctant to invest and to ramp up. But there's certainly a very key and clear demand that if we're going to hit net zero, that we need to have a much more encompassing skilled workforce. And then we can't take that in isolation. So when we talk about energy efficiency and insulation measures, we've got to then add in low carbon heat. The two are hand in glove. We're not going to deliver low carbon heating solutions effectively without first thinking about the fabric of the building. And the aspirations there around 600,000 heat pumps, that's going to need a significant investment. So we've got to move, and we've got to move a little bit quicker than we are at the moment. The traditional approach has always been that the old hand teaches the new. Certainly in the insulation sector, teams will split, the experienced hand will teach the new people that are brought on board. And that doesn't always reflect good practice. That teaching is what they know, not necessarily what's current and what's the best practice. And then it's compounded by the lack of really good labour market intelligence out there. I see lots of papers come across the desk, lots of figures around what the slightly skills need is going to be. The most reliable source of intelligence the construction industry relies on is CITB's Construction Skill Network, Labour Market Intelligence. You might be disappointed to know that that classes anything around energy efficiency under repair and maintenance, and still is fixated on what rightly so the construction industry deems as its bread and butter, your typical trades around carpentry, joinery, bricklaying, but doesn't focus on the particular skill sets around energy efficiency, and captures really the requirements under air source, ground source around HVAC, heating and ventilation. So we've got to consider the wider skills, and there seems to be a fixation on we need more retrofit coordinators, we need more retrofit coordinators, we need more assessors. Well, my pushback would be you can have somebody who's very competent to ensure a design is implemented, but if you haven't got competent people implementing it, it's a bit self-defeating. So we need to look broader than that. We need to upskill, we need to cross-skill, and importantly, we need to find ways to attract new talent to this industry. So what are the concerns? Starting again in the top corner, lack of apprenticeships. You may be surprised to know, and somebody may correct me on this, but currently there is not a single apprenticeship being delivered in energy efficiency insulation. There is a bit of light in the tunnel in that there is work going on with air source ground heat pumps for a Trailblazer apprenticeship, so they're going to have a nice shiny apprenticeship. But despite having new occupational standards, colleges are not delivering apprenticeships in this space. So we're not training anybody from grassroots on things like external wall insulation, internal wall, cavity wall. It is all on the job taught, or it's all manufacturer led and taught. We've got a lack of conversions and upskilling. So we've got people who are working in silos and missing out on the opportunities to move across measures. It's only the informed installer who's looking at how they progress somebody from one particular insulation measure to another. We don't see enough, I certainly don't see enough groundswell of people moving across from gas fitter to air source ground source heat pump. And their challenges, I'm sure MCS face as much as anybody else. Part of the challenge we've got, and part of the challenge linked to not attracting people, is we've got no career defined pathways. And this is not rocket science. We've not taken the time collectively to sit down and say, what do we need to actually make this industry attractive? What is your career opportunities if you progress into energy efficiency? Where are you going to go if you come in as an apprenticeship? What's your professional pathway up through assessment, coordination, design? What's your supervisory and managerial pathways? We're relying on traditional site manager qualifications. We're not focused enough on actually the skill sets we absolutely need to apply in energy efficiency retrofit. Which leads to it not being attractive to young people as an industry. The perception, similar to the perception construction's faced for a lot of years, is that this is a hire and fire industry. It's not had the sustainable funding it needs. It needs dedicated focus. People need to see that they do have a career in this, and it's a very, very positive career given everything that we need to do to achieve net zero. So we need to really educate. The industry needs to educate. We need to educate through local authorities, through schools, through colleges, and actually the most important people to educate in any of this is the public. And there's not enough campaigns doing that. So, solutions. We need better labour market intelligence, but actually the main focus here is we need something. We need a focal point, and we haven't got it. And I go back to my days in CITB when we set up the Plant Academy and the Civils Academy for the Olympic Park to provide people employment opportunities through the Olympics. I was involved in setting up the Crossrail Academy, the High Speed 2 Academy is now out there, and there are a number of other skills academies that are working in partnership with industry to deliver employment opportunities, preparing people for opportunity, moving people into apprenticeships. There's nothing in this space. Even if you look at the wider skills academies delivered by the colleges, they're delivering traditional occupations. They're green. I looked at one today in Nottingham. Their green skills is bricklaying and carpentry and joinery. And yes, it might have a green element to it, but it's not retrofit. It's not energy efficiency. Going back to the fact we need to clearly define our career pathways. We need to make sure that colleges are excited about how they can sell this to young people, and we need industry to work with education on delivery to get this moving at any pace. So, Academy focal point. It doesn't take a lot of investment. It needs industry to come together with DFE. We need to start looking at how we can identify and seek out capital funding opportunities. We need to match that with some revenue to make sure that we can support and underpin apprenticeship journeys. and that we can make sure that we're progressing people into this industry, into a career with some sustained funding to get it up and running, that chicken and egg bit, so that the industry can respond to the demands and the needs from government and hopefully from the appetite that comes from the private sector. That should not be a centre somewhere in Middle England that's delivering this. That needs to consider very much what's happening in the devolved administrations as well. So I'm not just talking about one focal iconic building. And I'm talking about that being a centre that the industry comes together to develop the core content around them career pathways. The industry then starts to deliver that content, shares it and franchises it, if you want, with colleges and FE and private training providers. We take the opportunity to standardise what we're doing so that we understand what the capability of somebody who's trained and started on this journey is going to be at any given point in time, to the right standards. And then we can find the space to innovate. Then we can find the space to make it a little bit sharper. We can find the space to deliver the efficiencies that we all want to deliver. It needs relationships. I missed one off there, really. It's industry, it's MCS, it's Trustmark, my own organisation, amongst many charities, colleges and schools, federations, energy suppliers is the one that should have been on there, and manufacturers. Because you know what? You've all got pots of money. You can all look to them pots of money to try and do something with government to help government match it. I'm available for questions after. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Nigel. I think a really key theme, which is starting to be very apparent through all of this, is how all the different pieces of the puzzle fit together, because obviously we need the skilled quality workforce in order to carry out any of the schemes which are being proposed. So yeah, really great presentation. Thank you. We'll hand over next to Stu Horn and Abby Ward from the Energy Saving Trust, who are going to talk to us about public engagement and advice services.
Great, thanks, Juliet. I'll just share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that okay?
Yeah, all good.
Perfect. Well, hi everyone. I'm Abby from Energy Saving Trust, and I'm joined by Stu Horn, our Head of Policy as well. And just to thank you, Juliet, for inviting us to this important conversation today and for having an input in the report as well. So we're just going to be talking about the role, the important role of public engagement and consumer advice that we see as a key part of the ecosystem that Juliet mentioned earlier. So just a quick bit about us, if you haven't heard of Energy Saving Trust already. We're an independent and impartial organisation focusing on net zero. We deliver programmes for governments across the UK and give advice directly to consumers from energy efficiency, retrofit and low carbon heating. And we deliver programmes you might have heard of, such as Home Energy Scotland and the Nest Advice Scheme in Wales, which is relevant to this conversation today. So just give you an idea of the flavour, I'll give you a flavour of the size of the task, which we're all very aware of. I'll just hone in on a few. As Juliet mentioned, there are varied housing types in the UK. That means that there's not a one size fits all approach that we can kind of roll out to all households, and this is why tailored advice is so important, that we'll get onto later, is people need different solutions for their homes. And then on the right just shows you within those houses there are people with varying needs, so they also need different support, and it is why it needs to be, it can't just be a kind of blanket approach. And then obviously with the current energy crisis and cost of living, this adds complexity to this and underlies the reason why we think that we need clear information and trusted advice as a solution, part of the solution to this. So I'll just start with awareness. So obviously we believe there's an informational gap that needs filling for households at the moment to increase their awareness and understanding of what retrofit is, low carbon heating, and what it actually means for them, because obviously everyone knows that we're all a lot more aware of climate change, but it doesn't filter into the home and what people need to do for their home. And obviously it's a massive part of our net zero targets of decarbonising our housing stock. So households at the moment don't understand the need to retrofit their homes or transition to clean heat and what change they need to make to their individual homes, because as I said, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and it'll be different for varying houses. And especially at the moment, people are becoming more aware of what energy efficiency measures can do to their homes, but the actual impact that this could have would spur them further on to make these changes more quickly and save them more money in the long term. And households don't know where to go to read about this or to ask about this, because there's lots of information on the internet, but there should be somewhere that households can go to for consistent and clear advice. So on the public awareness side, we are calling for a national awareness campaign that gives clear and consistent information to the whole of the UK. And then the secondary aspect of the campaign should then signpost households to an independent and trusted advice service that they can go to as the next step in the consumer journey, as we're very passionate about ensuring that there's a smooth customer journey so that households don't get lost and know exactly kind of where to go in their journey to decarbonising their home. So I'll now pass on to Stu, who's going to talk about the importance of this advice service.
Great, thanks, Abby. So for the reasons that Abby mapped out, so not only is it important to engage consumers with a public awareness campaign, but it's also important that then households can take action on the things they need to do to lower their bills. So it's really important that people are able to install the energy efficiency measures that they need to lower their bills. It's important that they understand how they can do that, because doing this is really complex and confusing. The current customer journey is really difficult, and also people need to be aware of what financial measures they can access to help them do that. We think it's really important that access to advice is consistent across the country. At the moment, there's an advice service in Scotland and there's one in Wales, but it's in England where at the moment provision of advice is really patchy. It really depends on where in the country you are. You might have a local authority that provides advice, but actually for the vast majority of people in England, there isn't anywhere that they can go. So it's important from a household point of view, but it's also important from a strategic point of view, because actually there's a big job to do and there's a real acceleration in terms of getting measures into people's homes. So we think that advice is a really key part in speeding up the delivery of those measures. So it's a key part of the net zero infrastructure. The things that really stand out here, so we need to get at least 600,000 heat pumps into homes by 2028. Consumers are going to be faced with a lot of unfamiliar technology, which they're going to need to understand. They're going to need to be comfortable with, and advice can play a really important role in this. That's not just heat pumps, but it's of new parts of the energy system, like battery storage or thermal storage in homes. So actually, there's a huge amount to get people comfortable with, and to normalize, so that these things can go into people's homes and be effective and help people to lower their bills and help us to address energy security. So could we skip to the next slide, Abby? So it's quite hard to describe in a short presentation exactly, to the fullest extent, everything that a good advice service should look like. We've pulled out some of the key principles here on this Wordle, and I just want to lift out some of these in particular. We think a good advice model should be consistent and comprehensive. So it should be consistent in the advice it provides. It should provide that consistently geographically across the country, so everyone's got the access to the same type of advice, and it should be comprehensive in terms of the range of information and advice it provides. It's really important that it's personally tailored. So providing bespoke advice to each person relevant to their personal circumstances and the home they live in is really powerful and more likely to prompt action and cut through the complexity. And an advice service should be continually improving. So advice is never static. The market's not going to be static. It will look very different in 10 years' time. And that means that an advice service should be constantly striving to be up to date with the latest technology, but also have a consistent focus on improvement in customer service. The key things that are sort of an advice service would deliver in this kind of area, it would be proactively engaging people. So people might come into the service and say, well, I'm looking to lower my bills, but actually then the service could engage them on lowering carbon at the same time. It could also deliver behavioural advice, which will help sustain those reductions on an ongoing basis after the measures are installed. It should should try and reach people through multiple channels so that people can engage through the channel that they're most comfortable with. So email, phone, web, or in person. And lastly, and really quite importantly, it should be able to provide advice to households about how to put things right if they've gone wrong. So even in the best operating industry where levels of customer service are really high, if you're installing millions of different measures, sometimes things are going to go wrong, and it's really important that consumers know how to do that, know what their rights are and how to access them. So just on the last couple of slides then, so the best model that we think that exists for this at the moment is the Home Energy Scotland service. This provides impartial, bespoke and personally tailored advice that's free to households, owner-occupiers and tenants, also to private landlords. So it's really comprehensive. It's delivered on a multi-channel basis, and it works with existing advice providers in Scotland. So it doesn't replace those existing services, it complements them and adds to a sort of more comprehensive and consistent consumer journey. So thinking about sort of the impacts that Home Energy Scotland has, so this is a service that we deliver for Scottish Government. It helps 90,000 customers a year. The customer satisfaction rate is really high, but critically, the advice is really effective. So many consumers actually act on the advice that they get. That means a lot of measures are going into homes. And in terms of the return on investment, there's a really high financial saving, lifetime financial saving, and also carbon saving associated with the measures that have gone in. So I'm going to pop the report that we've produced earlier in the year that talks about all the work that we've done in Scotland into the chat channel that goes into this in a bit more detail. But lastly, on the last slide, just want to pop up some of the qualitative quotes from people who've gone through the service, just kind of illustrate what a difference this has made to them in terms of helping them to lower their bills or to make their homes warm or to cut down on carbon. So I'm going to stop there and put the link in the chat, but happy to take questions later.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, both. Again, really compelling case, I think. Of course, if we're not engaging with households and encouraging them towards these measures, it's very hard once again to see how we can really successfully deliver and implement some of these schemes. So we'll move on to our final speaker today, David Adams from the Energy Efficiency Infrastructure Group, who's going to talk to us about one of those incentives which can help spur action from households, and that's energy saving stamp duty. So I'll hand over to you, David.
Hi, Juliet. Thank you very much. From a lovely sunny field in Wales, I have to say, hence the odd background. So I'm speaking on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Infrastructure Group, but also following a report that was published by the UK GBC beginning of last year, I think it was. So we've heard about a number of really good initiatives, and what I'm going to talk about is very complementary. But if we just go big picture just for a second, we're looking at about 300 to 400 billion pounds worth of investment required in this field for energy efficiency and the low carbon heat that we've been talking about. Nigel mentioned the low carbon heat as well. That's a spend rate of about 15 to 20 billion pounds a year. So the initiatives that we've been hearing about are significant, but the challenge is even bigger than that. And as has always been also been mentioned previously, in the owner-occupier sector in particular, we have a real dearth of policies. So great, yes, we need skills and training, yes, we need advice, and yes, we need to put funding into those that cannot afford this. But equally, there are a lot of people out there that we need to encourage to act, encourage to go for that advice, but act at a scale we've never seen before. And it needs private money. You know, 400 billion pounds, an eye-watering amount. But let's put it in perspective. That's the same as the value increase in house prices in the last 12 months. So 1 year of house price inflation is the amount it would cost to take all homes to net zero. There's something happening there. There's something that could happen there. And retrofit is complicated, but markets are good at delivering complicated solutions. So there's the framing for the energy saving stamp duty nudge. it's designed to be a nudge, to nudge a market. And the principle is very simple. The better the energy performance of the home, the lower the stamp duty paid. And if you buy any home, particularly a low performing one, if you then improve it within the first 2 years, a rebate would be paid, which is the difference between the stamp duty that was paid at the time of purchase and that would have been paid had those energy efficiency measures already been undertaken. So you can get that money, you have access to that money. So you're going to ask, how is it revenue neutral? Because it is. Well, the way it works is we're calculating stamp duty as today, and then we nudge it both down for the better performing homes, best performing homes, and we nudge it up for the least performing homes. So we get to revenue neutrality. It's progressive because stamp duty itself is progressive. And homes of very high value, even high value, there is a hell of an incentive to do the work. It's a real nudge. But those low value homes, it's enough to raise a question, to ask questions about what am I taking on? What do I need to keep in mind? What could I do in the next 2 years to get some of that money back? And there is an option there, and it links in with the other models, particularly the Eco Plus model and the fuel poverty models that have been discussed, to give an enhanced rebate to the low value homes that then tapers out as the value of the home increases. So it can be revenue neutral, or it can have a subsidy element to it, both of which work very naturally with using mechanisms that already exist. So it actually is very fast to implement, albeit you're most likely to want to make an announcement now and say it comes into play in 2 or 3 years' time. So the point about the energy saving stamp duty is to give that 20 years worth of work, because people will know it's there, it's revenue neutral, so it will stay there, and it's driving long-term action, the kind of action that we are able to skill up to per Nigel, and it will give a career to deliver, not this boom and bust, which is problematic. So it will drive that low energy market, and it frankly provides the essential underpinning to all of the other speakers and initiatives that we've just heard. There's not time to take you through examples, but I can. So if people want to contact me separately, then I'm more than happy to take you through whichever example type home you are particularly interested in. It might be the one you live in yourself. And take it from me, but challenge me. It does genuinely work really well. Juliet, thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, David. And yeah, maybe you could put your email address in the chat in case people do want to get in touch. And similarly, if other speakers are happy to do the same, that'd be brilliant. So we've got 10 minutes and a number of questions have already come in. So we'll run through those first. If we run out of time, maybe I can send the emails, send answers by email after the webinar, because I appreciate 10 minutes and a lot of questions might be a bit tight. But the first question we've got is, how can households' demand be aggregated to create cost savings and open up new opportunities? I don't know, Peter, if you want to kind of take that one on from a fuel poverty perspective, or Keith, whether that's something which might be of relevance for Eco Plus.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer it a little bit. I think one of those opportunities I only briefly flagged in my presentation is around energy networks, where energy networks see grid constraints on their network, particularly electricity network. They tend to overlap with areas of high density of energy use, so tower blocks, for example. And in that way, you can get some scale and aggregation into a major energy efficiency retrofit, and potentially, particularly if DNOs act on their current license obligation, which is to support energy efficiency delivery, you could see a capital contribution from the energy network sitting alongside any other form of incentive. So that's one way that it can happen. The other way that it's happened historically in the past is the area-based energy efficiency rollout. We were lucky enough as NEA to pilot initially the idea of an area-based approach, which became warm zones. Sadly, warm zones are no longer with us because the market moved very much towards sort of individual houses and pepper potting. But that concept's still used elsewhere to great effect, and that can bring economies of scale and costs down, as well as get people excited about the initiative.
Brilliant, thanks, Peter. Keith, we've got a question next for you. Are you concerned that Eco 4 still hasn't been laid before Parliament and that Eco 3 forms expire the 30th of June, which impact contracts and installers around the Eco scheme? So yeah, very topical question. I don't know if you're happy to comment on that one.
Yeah, well, the short answer is yes. I think all eco-obligated suppliers would be concerned about the delay in laying the regs. Obviously, there's this gap in the schemes between Eco 3 and Eco 4. We have interim delivery guidance where people can deliver to early, if you like, to Eco 4, or they can deliver on an interim basis to Eco 3 rules with some exceptions. I think the concern is that there's no visibility of the draft regs. This needs to be a priority to get this through, particularly before summer recess on the 21st of July. Otherwise, you are looking at October, November time when the scheme was essentially started from the 1st of April. That's quite a significant gap that is ultimately causing concern to suppliers and to their supply chain partners as well. They're operating without any sort of regulatory framework, which is difficult and challenging. But yeah, hopefully we can get this in before summer recess and provides that certainty that we need.
Brilliant, thanks, Keith. We've got a question next maybe for Abby and Stu. So talking to people outside the industry, feedback is that the term retrofit doesn't inspire, engage, or explain the positives. Do we need a different term such as future fit?
That's a really good idea. I think yeah, I think that's a good idea to think about. I think it's just generally getting the education out there of what it is in the first place. I think whatever term you kind of use, I think everything to someone is unfamiliar at first, and then once they learn about it and understand it, that's the key there. So I think it does, even though that's a very good point, I think it doesn't matter what kind of words you use, it's just getting that understanding out there so that it becomes the norm, like insulation, like roof insulation, people are much more aware of. I think once there's that first engagement and awareness, then I think that's the key here.
Brilliant, thanks, Abby. And we've got another one on the kind of advice piece. What's the right balance between community, local, and national provision?
So both are really important. So we believe that there should be kind of a national service as the kind of umbrella that sets the standard across the country. So as we said, everyone has access to kind of that baseline of consistent, comprehensive advice. And then we've seen great local schemes that are doing their own thing, such as in Bristol at the moment. So there's definitely room for that. But I think the national service we think is really important, that's available to everyone as kind of the first point of call to have that initial engagement on what they can do, where they can go for that initial advice, and then they can choose to continue their journey with a local provision if that's there, which is definitely a really good thing. So obviously, if it's at a local level, then that local advice service can be very tailored to their area and what their experience is. So both have a very, very important role to play.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Sorry, do you want to comment, Stu?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that and say that in Scotland, actually, Home Energy Scotland is a national advice service, but it's regionally structured. So actually, when people come into the service, they'll come into one of the 8 regional advice centres, and that advice will be specific to where those people live and tailored to that area, as well as being tailored to their home. So there are ways of making sure people get that consistent information all the way through, which is absolutely vital, but also it speaks to their local circumstances too.
Thanks both. I think the next one's probably for Nigel, and it's talking about some of the challenges about cross-departmental coordination and throwing the Department for Education into the mix. So the question seems to be, how much of this training and skills challenge can be started to be tackled immediately within the private sector, and how much needs buy-in from the government immediately? And what are the first steps from government which would improve the picture without needing to get a new institution off the ground? Quite a big question.
You know, and I agree, the landscape isn't easy. You know, we've got DLUC working on competent person schemes to mandatory technical standards. We've got BAYS working to MVQs under PAS. We've managed to align them and, you know, written the national occupational standards that are common to both into it, so we can get them to work cross department. DFE is a challenge. I think my brief answer to the question is sort out the career pathways, get the right people around the table, get CITV to look seriously at what it's telling us in its labour market intelligence and start giving us the right intelligence. CLC and the Construction Leadership Council, we need to get better at working with them because they're representing a group that is traditional mainstream construction and not necessarily enough of what we need to do in this space. So there's a lot we could do together. There are a number of little providers popping up, industry-led, delivering, but they're delivering to the low fruit agenda. Because we haven't got the career pathways, because we're not establishing the apprenticeships, then we're not delivering the right stuff. You know, a 2-day introduction to retrofit is not going to give anybody anything that's of any substance or value. It's going to give them an appreciation. We need to go beyond the appreciation now if we want to do this seriously. And the journey to an apprenticeship is a 2-year journey at best. It's not a 6-week employability program to work in this marketplace and then learn a bit on the job. You know, the volume we're going to need to be doing, we need some really competent individuals early on. So I think we can do a lot more together. I think DFE are a vital part of it because actually DFE have got the wherewithal to influence these skills academies that are already out there. Because when you look at the FE landscape, it's driven now by profit and loss. The days where FE used to deliver quite marginal and innovative courses have gone. They're focused on mainstream. They're focused on getting bums on seats in traditional college courses because that's where they make their money from. If we're going to do this, we've got to change that model temporarily until we've got the appetite and the volume coming through. So we've got to invest at the front end to make sure that people like FE colleges and these academies are comfortable to do it. And my whole concept is give us something iconic that's going to kickstart it, get it on people's agenda, get people talking about it. Construction spent years talking about modern methods of construction and sustainability, and it was just a thing they talked about. It took a long time before they started to do it. They set up the Sustainability Academy to kickstart it.
Thanks, Nigel. Yeah, excellent answer. We've just got 1 minute left. I think we've got time to squeeze in one more question. So I'll do this one for Keith. Given what we've heard about the skills gap and kind of some of the supply chain challenges, how quickly do you think the Eco Plus could be introduced? So, for example, is it plausible for this winter?
Yes, I think it could be. I guess that would depend on how the scheme is designed, if it's attractive, and if it allows. The key point is, and this kind of links back to what Nigel's talking about, having and others about the supply chain. Obviously, Eco 4 is an increased scheme. It's £1 billion. I think it used to be 650 million, if I'm not mistaken, for Eco 3. So the supply chain has already had to grow to deliver Eco 4. Now, if we're saying Eco Plus is going to be another £1 billion, obviously the supply chain would also need to grow. So I guess it depends on how you do it. So, for example, you could scale it up. So in the first year or the first 6 months, it might be 300 million, and then it might go to 900 million, and then it might go to £1 billion. But indications from industry and the conversations I've been having with suppliers is that we've been aiming for April next year, but it could be introduced for winter if needs be. Obviously, that's the big concern, isn't it, when energy prices, when the price cap is going to go up. Obviously, there is some government support there already that's been announced, which is significant. But yes, it could have obviously add to that impact if it was in place from winter.
Well, thanks, Keith. That's a really positive note for us to end on. I appreciate we've gone 1 minute over and we haven't managed to get through even half of the questions. But I'll share those with the panelists and I'll also check in and share the slides if everyone's comfortable for me to do so. Huge thanks again to all our excellent speakers. It's been a really excellent and rich conversation today. And yeah, looking forward to working with everyone on this going forward. Please do get in touch if you want to discuss further. Thanks again and speak soon. Bye.
Thanks, Juliet. Thank you, guys.